about 27 years as members here, and Jane is still a member. But this is home, and we're glad to be back with you for a Sunday. We are beginning our third year serving at Bonacqua and Nunley United Methodist Churches, where Craig is today. Craig called me between services, and believe it or not, Craig got lost between churches. But he finally Stephanie got him back on the right track, so they were making it to the second church with plenty of time. Would you pray with me, please? God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of the hearts of all of your people be an acceptable offering in your sight. Amen. How many of you are familiar with extreme sports? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a few of you. Milton, I know you are. Extreme sports are defined as actions or adventure sports that are perceived as involving some kind of a high degree of risk. And these activities might involve speed, they might involve height, but they all require a high level of physical exertion, and some may even require a little bit of special gear. There's a high level of uncontrollable variables and natural phenomena like gravity that may impact some of these sports. Some of these sports and activities might include base jumping, and if you're not familiar with base jumping, it's where somebody purposely jumps off a cliff with a parachute, or ice climbing, or maybe wingsuit flying, and that's a picture of a flying squirrel. That'll do it. Bungee jumping, sky surfing, where somebody will strap a surfboard type appliance to their feet and then jump out of a perfectly good airplane and use this board to perform acrobatics on their way down in their free fall. It might include rock climbing or mountain climbing and many, many different dangerous activities, and all of them require a high level of a risk of commitment. You have to risk commitment. You have to risk physical training. Like Christy was saying in the children's message, you have to risk mental fortitude and passion. I want to add another extreme activity to that list for our consideration today, and that is living your faith as a Christian. Now, how does that become an extreme activity, you may ask? I'll get to that. All of these things involve extreme activities. They all have one thing in common, and the people that have agreed to commit to these have made the decision to give it everything they've got. They're all in, so to speak. They're willing to risk everything, including their very lives, to give their chosen activity the very best that they possibly can, the very best that they have inside them. They want to be the best, and they want to commit themselves to do everything they possibly can to better themselves, knowing that they are, in fact, risking everything to follow this passion. And then while they train for these activities, they take inventory of their lives. They take inventory of their lifestyle. They bring everything about them to the table, and then they decide what's not good. And what's not good, they get rid of. And what is good, they focus on. Once they make that determination, they're striving to be the best that they possibly can, while getting rid of all of those things that are detrimental to the potential of their success. They focus on things like getting rest, like eating right, building stamina, improving their physical and their mental well-being. Now, you might ask, how does something that I do a few days a week or on Sunday mornings or a few hours here and there, how does that possibly qualify as an extreme event? Well, let me compare it to a couple of things, the way that we might approach that. It's like somebody going to a rock climbing wall inside a nice climate-controlled gym where they are belayed. Somebody has them tied off. And if they slip and fall and they don't catch them, there's a nice cushy mattress for them to fall on. And they do that instead of going out and climbing a mountain. Or they watch a skydiving exhibition instead of strapping on a parachute and jumping out of that same perfectly good airplane. We can be very comfortable being spectators or dabbling in some kind of a sport as a weekend warrior, and that satisfies our need for the thrill and for the excitement, but we are still in a very safe and non-threatening environment. And a lot of us take that same approach to our spiritual lives and following our faith as followers of Christ. We're basically weekend warriors that are involved but not quite committed to the point of taking a risk. Now, I'm sure that y'all have heard this, and I bring up the story of the ham and egg breakfast, okay? The chicken was involved, the pig was committed. That's where we stand. You know, I noticed when Christy invited everybody to get up and actually get out of the pew, there were some that were hesitant. Are we committed to go the extra step? So how do we go from being a weekend warrior to being an extreme warrior, from being a chicken to being a pig? Well, the answer is pretty simple, and it's held right here. This book is full of examples, but two of them that we're going to concentrate on today are what was read in the parables that Jesus taught. The first parable was so simple, it's told in a single verse. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and hid. And for the joy over it, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Those that Jesus was talking to at the time would have probably understood better than us the legal and the cultural meanings and wouldn't need an explanation. But we probably need to make sure that we understand what was actually happening here, because that parable can be misunderstood. Treasure that was hidden in a field would have been much more prevalent in Jesus' time than it is today. In that time, there wasn't really any safe place to put your money or your valuables. There were no banks, there were no savings accounts, there were no securities. So burying it was much more likely than trusting the money to the money changers at the temples. And we've heard enough stories about the money changers at the temple. Jesus didn't really like them very much. Most persons of wealth, most of their wealth was in land and in personal possessions. So only the really extremely wealthy of the time would have had any coins or jewels or any other possessions that they treasured, so they would bury it in an effort to hide it. And people would bury their treasures based on their fear or on their distrust of everybody or just on their plain old-fashioned greed. Remember, we're dealing with people of a different era here. And in this time, we have a man who has discovered a buried treasure in a field that belongs to somebody else. And we're led to believe through the scriptures that he had been hired to work this field for the landowner. So he's plowing the field. And all of a sudden, he looks down and he has unearthed treasure. So immediately, he goes back and he puts it back exactly where he found it. He reburies it. And then he goes out and he gathers everything he owns in the world and he sells it just so he can buy that field from the person that he was working for. Now, in today's somewhat litigious society, we might wonder if that man was being just a little bit unethical, not telling the owner of the land that he had found something. After all, that treasure didn't belong to him, should he not have reported it back to the landowner? Well, according to the Jewish law at the time, he did exactly what he was supposed to do. According to the law, if something of value whose owner was unknown was found outside, the landowner had no claim to it. And you might say, well, the landowner must have known it was there. Well, obviously he didn't. Otherwise, he probably would have dug it up before he had the land plowed. Or he certainly would have dug it up before he sold the land to somebody. The man who dug it up had several options. He could have just taken it and he could have run with it, or he could have taken only a part of it and buried the rest of it. But he didn't do that. He put it back where it was, and then he went and gathered everything he had, sold it, and purchased that land so he could rightfully claim it as his. The point of the parable is that the man found something so valuable that he was willing to go all in. He was willing to sell everything that he owned just to secure that treasure. And he was so overjoyed by his discovery, he was willing to surrender everything just to gain the treasure that he had found. Now, the second parable is just as short, but it makes the same point, and it reads again. And Jesus, he keeps starting these with again. Again. It's kind of like the people weren't getting the message. He says, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking beautiful pearls, who, when he found one pearl of great price, went and sold all that he had, and he bought it. Now, this man, unlike the worker in the field, this man was a professional. He was basically a wholesaler that bought and sold pearls. And if you had fine, perfect pearls, you were considered extremely wealthy because